Hello, everybody. Welcome to Common Hour. My name is Jim Strick, and I'm the chair of the program in Science, Technology, and Society, and a professor of environmental studies. I'd like to introduce you to our ASL interpreter, Emily Phipps. Thank you, Emily, for interpreting for us at Common Hour. Please note that if you need to change your screen view to include Emily as you watch, you can adjust the screen display mode in the small box labeled View towards the upper right of the Zoom window. You can enable the CC closed captioning if you like as well. A very warm welcome to all at our third Common Hour of the semester, Swimming with Jellyfish, Building a Startup to Eat More Sustainably. Common Hour is a unique and inclusive program that brings the Franklin and Marshall community together every week during the academic year for culturally and intellectually enriching events. It's the only regularly scheduled event that unites students, faculty, and staff, and invites the larger community to join us. Throughout the pandemic, Common Hour has continued to provide a virtual gathering space and a source of inspiration, education, and compelling discussion for the F&M community and beyond. We hope you'll join us in Common Hour next week for Professor Stephanie Rivera Beruz of Marquette University and her talk, In the Face of Modernity, Lettered Women of the Hispanophone Caribbean. Please follow Common Hour on our webpage, the Presence event calendar, and our F&M Common Hour Facebook and Instagram pages. During today's event, Zoom viewers can submit questions for our speakers via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Please indicate your affiliation with the college, faculty, staff, or student, though we don't need to know your name. And now I'd like to introduce F&M Geosciences major, Maddie Hilbig, who will introduce today's speakers. Thanks, Maddie.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Common Hour sponsored by the Department of Earth and Environment and the Science, Technology, and Society program. I'm Maddie Hilbig, class of 2022, majoring in environmental studies, government, and geosciences. Many of us, especially in the wake of the recent COP26, are frustrated by the slow pace of the government action to combat the climate crisis. Our speakers today, Lucas and Lydia Slobodian, aren't waiting for governments. They are working on a way for all of us to help save the planet without governments, while at the same time making it fun. Please welcome Lucas and Lydia of the company Jellyfish.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Jim. We are so very honored and excited to be here and able to talk to the F&M community today. Before we get into introducing ourselves, I want to start with a question. So I'm going to ask Luke to pull it up on the presentation, and then I'm going to put the poll, which you can respond to in the webinar. Okay, so you should see the poll now. It's just a quick poll to see where we are with what do you think, in your opinion, which of these actions has a significant impact on your carbon footprint? Not a minor or trivial impact, but which of these is a significant way to reduce your own contribution to climate change? Eating chicken instead of beef, avoiding palm oil, choosing organic products, recycling plastic packaging, or all of the above? Take a minute to answer it. While you're answering, Luke and I are going to introduce ourselves, and then we'll come back and we'll share with you the answer. So, my name is Lydia. I'm co-founder and CEO of Jellyfish, and I lead our research and sustainability team. And I'm also an environmental lawyer. And I, as Maddie mentioned, like many people working in environmental policy, I've been getting frustrated over the past 10 years of working in this space at the lack of movement on the part of governments and policymakers, and also personally frustrated at the lack of impact that I was having, that I was able to have working for a big international organization. At the same time, because of the work I was doing, I was seeing the power of private companies, the private market, and personal consumer choices to really make a big difference. And I realized that many people, myself included, were very passionate about living more sustainably and making sustainable choices, but we just didn't know what to do that would make an actual difference, that would make this meaningful contribution to reducing our own carbon footprint. So during this time, while I was working for this big organization, I had this idea for an app, an easy platform that would empower consumers and give us the information that we need so that we can make better choices that's based in science and not advertising. And so when I finally left that organization, I roped in two of my former colleagues who unfortunately could not be here today. They're both based in Germany. Lorena Martinez Hernandez, who is one of our climate experts and also does our finances, and Lydia Barcodes, who is in charge of all of our marketing. And if you've seen any of our social media, she is the mastermind behind our social media presence. Lydia is French, Lorena is Mexican. And so from the beginning, we knew that we wanted this to be an international endeavor and a multilingual endeavor. At that point, Lorena and Lydia and I, we kept talking about this idea that I'd had to develop this app to provide people information about the carbon footprint of their purchases and particularly their food. And we realized we needed someone technical. We needed the technical help. And that's when I roped in my brother, Lucas Slobodian, who is an experienced programmer and also, importantly, a gamer. So I'm going to turn over to Luke to introduce himself. Luke.
Yes, thank you. I'm Lucas. I'm a co-founder, vice president, chief technical officer of Jellyfish. I'm not a lawyer, but I've always been interested in science technology. Growing up in our family, it was hard not to be. We were invited here today originally by Professor Tim Bechtel. He always had something cool going on, a new story or topic or project that he was discussing around family gatherings when we were having dinner. And I remember one time in particular, he took us hunting fossils. I think I was like 9 or 10. And of course that was cool, but what was even cooler was how he somehow managed to give a lecture on the rocks we found, or how the fossils came to be, how they got into the rocks, or how through erosion or shifting tectonic plates, they came to the surface. Somehow he made my young brain realize it wasn't just a lecture or even science, it was just cool. So anyway, fast forward all the way to October 2020, my sister Lydia calls me out of nowhere and says, I've got this great idea and I need a tech nerd. And now I'm here talking to you about this great idea.
Okay, so I'm going to end the polling and go back to that question that we asked at the beginning. So you should be able to see the results. I asked which of the following has a significant impact on your carbon footprint. About a quarter of you chose eating chicken instead of beef. Some of you said avoiding palm oil. Some of you said choosing organic. Several of you said recycling plastic packaging. And then more than half of you chose all of the above. Okay, well, eating chicken instead of beef is actually the only one of these options that really has that significant impact. If this is surprising to you, it was also surprising to me when I started getting into this research, because some of these answers are non-intuitive when you start looking at the actual science. Avoiding palm oil. So I'm sure we've seen like the social media posts of the palm oil plantations that are grown on deforested rainforest. And this is real. This is not fake news. This is a real problem that rainforest is being cut down and in order to convert to agricultural land, and that often palm plantations are grown on that newly cleared agricultural land. The problem is palm oil is actually one of the most efficient oils in terms of land use. The amount of productivity you get from palm oil is higher per acre than almost any other oil. And according to an IUCN report, if we just avoid eating palm oil altogether, if we boycott it, and we choose other oils like olive oil or heaven forbid, even milk made from dairy, we're probably going to see an increase in deforestation because we're still going to need that land. We're still going to need land to grow these products for people to consume. But instead of the very efficient palm oil, we're actually going to need even more land so that we can grow one of these less efficient products. So what do we do about palm oil? We actually just launched a blog post on this that you can read about how we can make the palm oil industry more sustainable, but the answer isn't avoiding it because the substitute product might be even worse. 2, choosing organic products. Organic products are often heavily marketed as more green and as better for the planet. And there is some truth in that. Organic farming can reduce the use of pesticides. It can reduce water use in some cases, depending on the irrigation chosen. It can reduce agricultural runoff. But there's no evidence that it actually reduces carbon footprint. When you're talking about contribution to climate change, organic products often use more land because it's often a less intensive form of agriculture than conventional alternatives. And that greater land use can even result in a higher carbon footprint. So just choosing organic products, it may have some environmental benefits, but by itself, it's not going to have a significant impact on reducing your carbon footprint. Recycling. Plastic waste is a huge problem. Ocean plastic is very significant. We've probably seen pictures of ocean plastic. This is real, it's scary. It's one of the big environmental issues that we are facing today. But recycling isn't necessarily going to make the problem go away. There are lots of issues in the recycling chain, and there's right now the way we do recycling, which is the United States and Europe, the big plastic consuming countries, we ship most of our plastic recycling overseas for processing. That is not a sustainable way to handle the waste stream. And so just taking your plastic waste and putting it in the recycling bin, it isn't necessarily going to help the problem of ocean plastic. And there's no reason to think that it would help reduce your emissions. What can help reduce your emissions is reducing plastic use. Plastic is made from fossil fuels, so reducing your use of plastic in the first place can keep those fossil fuels in the ground. But recycling carries all of these energy costs and the problem with the waste management chain, as I said. So it's not necessarily actually going to help reduce your carbon footprint. So as I said, I found this surprising, but I also found that it illustrates this problem that we were grappling with, that a lot of us really want to make a difference. We really want to use our own choices, our power as consumers to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce our environmental impact, to create a more sustainable planet. But we don't know how. So we enter the jellyfish. We came up with this idea for jellyfish. The idea came from a few different sources. First, I was doing some policy work on carbon labeling, and I still think carbon labeling is a fantastic idea. And if we could get a law on carbon footprint labeling, that could be enormous. What that means is, just like you have the nutritional label on food products you buy, you would also have a label that would show the carbon footprint of that product, how much greenhouse gases are attributable to the production and supply chain of that product from the time it was produced until it got to you. However, we don't have these carbon labels yet. And there are different voluntary carbon label ideas floating around, but none of them have really taken off, and all of them depend on the companies in question agreeing to put a label on their product. I also have, in some cases, I have a problem with some of the science behind some of these labels, but we'll get to that in a second. The second piece of this is these calorie counters. I don't know if you've ever tried one of these apps that helps you lose weight or get fit or manage your nutrition. A lot of them have barcode scanners that you can scan the barcode of your food and you can get the nutritional information right on your phone immediately. That convenience of being able to scan the barcode, you don't need the company to agree to put a label on their product. You can scan any barcode. I think most consumer products in the United States, I would dare say all consumer products, major consumer products in the United States have barcodes. So it's a very easy way to grab the identifying information of that product and get information easily to consumers. We've also found that a lot of people these days do use their phone to look things up while they're shopping. I do as well. And so there's definitely a market, we were thinking, for some kind of barcode scanning app that combined this idea of carbon labeling, providing that instant information on carbon footprint while you're purchasing, and the ease of scanning a barcode. And then the third kind of component that came into this was points and miles. I was flying a lot for work, which again was another source of my frustration, that I was working in environmental law and I was just flying all the time. But because I was flying so much, I was earning a lot of points and I got addicted. I started opening credit cards to get the points. I started making spreadsheets of which flights would get me which points in which alliance. I totally got addicted to the points and miles game. I don't regret it. I earned a lot of free flights that way. But the value of it to me was more than just the free flights. It was about winning. It was about earning points. And I think this addictiveness of earning points, of getting rewards, is very powerful. And so we decided we want to incorporate some of that into our app through this idea of gamification. We don't want this just to be climate change is depressing. We don't want this just to be depressing. This like, oh, we've got to do our part just to save the world. We want it to be fun. We want it to be addictive. We want it to be engaging. So that's the idea of bringing in the gamification and bringing in the points and miles. So I'm going to turn it over to Luke now to describe a little bit more of how all of this comes together and what our idea is and how this app will actually work.
All right. So before I go into my whole speech, this slide I want to just call your attention to. This is our overall sum it up idea of what's going on. Jellyfish is an app we're developing to help environmental conscious consumers make better choices while they're shopping for groceries. When you scan an item in the grocery store, like Lydia said, we can get that important research-backed information on the CO2 equivalent produced by the life cycle of that product. The app will also provide recommendations on alternatives. And the easiest way to think about that is if you're in the grocery store and you scan a packet of ground beef, the app can give you that information on the CO2 of that ground beef, but it can also say, hey, why don't you go with ground chicken because that's lower CO2? Or even better, why don't you go with a plant-based product, ground meat? That's even better. And give you these alternatives. And the idea of the points comes in if you do choose one of these alternatives. We hope to be able to give you some points or some cash back or some kind of reward for making that better choice, would have a lower impact.
Okay, so before we get into the next section, I'm going to ask you another question. What % of global human-caused greenhouse gas emissions come from our food? So you should see that question now. 5 to 10%, 15 to 25%, 25 to 40%, 40 to 60%. And while you're thinking about that, go on to the next slide, Luke. I'm going to talk about some of the general solutions around climate change, because the first thing that we tend to think when we're confronted with one of these initiatives to all do our part to reduce our own footprint is, why should I be doing this? Isn't it the big companies? Isn't it shouldn't the government do something about climate change? My answer would be yes, there are government solutions that would be very effective and wonderful. A carbon tax could be extremely effective. Old-fashioned emissions regulations, if they're well implemented, well enforced, could be very effective. Vehicle emission standards, amazing. Building codes so that our houses and our office buildings are more energy efficient, could be wonderful. There are a lot of other government level climate solutions. Public transport, traffic, a lot of urban planning decisions would really help with emissions reductions. However, we're not always there yet. And my opinion is, I am still an environmental lawyer. I'm still working, my day job, I am still working on getting these legal frameworks in place. But we got a crisis here. We need to be all hands on deck, throwing everything we can at this. And so I don't think we can ignore personal level solutions, what we ourselves can do on a voluntary basis. And that's things like fly less. Well, thank you, pandemic. I think we've all been flying a lot less in the past 2 years. Drive less, or bicycle or walk or use public transport where you can. Buy secondhand and just buy less. Use less energy, particularly less heating and air conditioning. So there are a lot of these solutions that are possible. However, one of the big ones that we choose to focus on is food. And the reason is, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. 25 to 40% of our emissions come from our food. They come from the food, somewhere in that food supply chain between agriculture through to getting the food to you on your plate, through to food waste management. It looks like most of you got this right. And it's a wide range, 25 to 40%, and it's because there are different ways of calculating the emissions from agriculture and the emissions from food. But the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is, it represents best global scientific consensus on climate change. They put it at 25 to 37% of global anthropogenic human-caused greenhouse gas emissions somehow are attributable to our food. The other reason to focus on food, so it's about a quarter to a third of our global emissions, is it's just a low-hanging fruit. It's a relatively easy thing that we can do without needing a government framework in place. So if everyone in the world, if every human shifted completely to a plant-based diet, we would cut those global food emissions in half. And global land use from agriculture would be reduced by 75%. 75% less land use. And think what we could do with all of that land that we're not using for agriculture. First, we wouldn't need to cut down rainforests to grow palm oil or other foods because we would have the land. And second, we could reforest. We could plant vegetation that is more powerful at drawing carbon from the atmosphere, that could serve as a carbon sink on that land. Okay, but that's wild. Like, we're not gonna, everyone in the world isn't gonna shift to a plant-based diet, right? Like that's a dream. More realistically, if just Americans ate 50% less meat, just 50% less meat, we could save 224 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. What does that mean? That's 48 million vehicles in a year, or half of all the passenger cars in the US. We could take half of the cars in the US, the passenger cars in the US, off the road by just eating 50% less meat. That's not a vegan. You don't have to go all the way vegan. It's just 50% less meat. More than that, it matters what meat you eat. All meat is not created equal, as we said at the beginning. And if you swap chicken for beef, you can cut your diet carbon footprint in half just by replacing your ground beef with ground chicken. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Luke.
All right, so we're going to talk more about the app itself here. And I want to start with the goals. What are we really trying to do here? Lydia's been great at explaining the science, so I'm going to explain what we are doing. We want to get short-term, we want to get everybody on Jellyfish. Right now, there are plenty of health and climate conscious people out there who are looking for solutions like Jellyfish that we're offering. There are a few carbon tracker apps out there, but they mainly make use of very broad assumptions when it comes to food. Most just ask if you eat meat, or if you're a vegetarian, or if you're a vegan, and then guesstimate your carbon footprint from that. It is a large guess based on averages. It's not very granular, and that's where we want to do something. We want to be able to allow you to track on a personal level, day to day, week by week, month by month, and see what exactly you're getting, not just an average because you fall into one of these three broad categories. We also know that there are plenty of climate change warriors out there, just like there are many progressives and science-minded individuals who would be interested in tracking the impact and making positive changes. But those are the easy people to get. All we need to do is get our messaging out. Doing talks like this to young minds like you really helps us get the message out, get this tool out there, get people aware. But we want to reach everybody, not just the easy people. We want to reach the conservatives. We want to reach the meat and potatoes crowd. We want to reach the families who think eating healthy or organic is the right answer, but can't afford it. So short term, we want everybody through social media, gamification, cash back that we spoke about. We think we can even get diehard climate deniers to join us and see if they can save money on their grocery bill will be enough to make a small change. Like Lydia said, even small changes can go a long way. When it comes to the industry, short term, we just want to build that large user base. If we can attract corporate sponsors with a large enough user base, we can scan products that we hope the corporate partners will pay to have their products featured as an alternative. I used the ground beef example earlier, and one of the best alternatives is a plant-based ground beef. I'm sure everybody knows the big two out there, and there's several. But imagine if one of them said, hey, we'll pay you to feature our brand of plant-based ground beef to be your official recommendation. We can then use that money to further our science, to give more cash back, and to get more people onto this app and making these better choices. Long term, for the consumer over the long term, we hope that the science we present, as long as the cash back we offer is a better alternative, will create change in consumer behavior. It's really well-known fact that people respond much better to positive reinforcement than negative. Getting that money back, earning those points, getting those constant reminders and kudos that you're doing a good job, and just seeing that you're doing a good job really can create a substantial and long-term change in consumer behavior. Goes hand in hand with the industry long-term goal. If we have a large enough change in our consumer behavior, we think we can affect industry demand. Like Lydia was saying, there's a lot of government regulation options out there, but we have the power as consumers to say what we will buy and what we won't buy. Consumer pressure can drive change. When the demand for plant-based burgers outpaces demand for ground beef, producers will rise to meet that demand. If consumers are buying more chicken than beef, the industry will take notice. When brand A demonstrates that they have a lower carbon footprint than brand B, we hope that pressure, that demand from consumers will put pressure on that first brand to change and adopt these better policies.
Okay, another quiz. What is the biggest source of emissions in the life cycle of our food? So let me launch this poll. Okay. Is it methane emissions from livestock, like cow farts? It's actually cow burps as well, but the farting cow is very cute. Land use. Is it transport, getting the food to you, or is it food waste? And again, while you think about that, while you put in your answer, I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology and our algorithm. Okay, so first, what are we talking about when we talk about carbon footprint? Two terms, the life cycle analysis. That means we look at the emissions from each step in the production, use, and disposal process. Sometimes this is called a cradle to grave analysis because we're actually going before the cradle, but we're going from the first inputs into the product until the final disposal. And then we're going to talk about carbon footprint in terms of CO2 equivalent. This means how much carbon would be needed to use the same global warming potential over 100 years. So carbon is not the only greenhouse gas. There are many greenhouse gases, and they have different levels of global warming potential. For example, methane is 25 times as strong as carbon in terms of warming potential, but it stays in the atmosphere for a much shorter time. So to compare methane to carbon and different greenhouse gases with carbon, we talk about the CO2 equivalent, which is this: how much carbon would be needed to achieve the same global warming potential over 100 years. Okay, let's revisit the quiz. Okay, so most of you chose methane emissions, and methane emissions are a really significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. However, land use, just the sheer emissions coming from all of that land that is needed to grow crops, and more importantly, all the land needed to grow the feed for livestock, those emissions are about twice the other, all of the other emissions combined: the methane, the transport, and the food waste. Transport, compared to land use and methane, transport emissions are actually relatively small. And again, this is something that surprised me, because I thought, eat local, buy local. That's one of the biggest things you can do. And it turns out, unfortunately, buying local doesn't have that much of a difference, because compared to the production it costs, the emissions associated with production, the emissions associated with transport are relatively low. Now, the exception is certain foods, like certain fruits, have a relatively low production footprint and a relatively high transport footprint. For example, if they need to be air freighted. And for those foods, the transport can make a difference. But in general, those foods have a much lower carbon footprint than the big emitters like meat and dairy. So we have found that in general, if you're looking to reduce your emissions, think about what you're eating. Don't think so much about where it's from. Food waste is a bit of a trick question. So food waste itself is not a significant source of emissions. The decomposition of food does produce some emissions, but it's not a ton compared to the other stages in the life cycle. However, food waste is still important, because if you waste food, then all of those emissions that came in from all of the other stages in the life cycle, all of the emissions generated on the farm and from the land use and from the transport, all of those emissions are wasted. They're literally wasted, because you're not consuming them, you're not enjoying it, you're not turning it into calories, you're just buying that extra food that never gets used. So it represents a wasted carbon footprint. But the waste disposal itself is not a significant source of emissions. Okay, if you go to the next slide. So I mentioned opportunity costs. And this is one of the biggest questions our team has had to grapple with. The key thing to take away in this slide is that the blue bars represent the emissions from all of the other steps in the supply chain. So when you're looking at beef or lamb and goat, it's the emissions from methane, the emissions from the energy of the tractors on the farm, the transport emissions, all of that is the blue. And then the yellow represents the opportunity cost from land use. What does opportunity cost mean? It means if we are using a certain piece of land to grow feed for cattle, we're not using that land for something else. And we could, if we weren't growing feed for cattle on that land, we could use it for growing a forest, growing another form of natural vegetation. We could use it to grow biofuels. We could use it to grow some other crop. We could use it to grow feed for humans, plants and vegetables. So that opportunity cost is the difference between the net carbon emissions from the ideal use, which is usually negative because it would be a carbon sink, and the net carbon emissions from the current use, which might be growing feed for livestock. Why do we look at it this way? This is a relatively new way of looking at it. A lot of life cycle analyses don't look at opportunity costs, they look at land use change. So you, in fact, when you did this poll, you might have been like, no, Lydia, you're wrong. I've seen charts that show methane as the biggest emission. And when you look at land use change, some calculations will show that. Land use change means I'm not considering what else I could be using this land for. I'm just considering whether I had to change this land from, for example, forest to agricultural land, and what the emissions are from that change. from forest to agricultural land. So you might see advertised, for example, deforestation-free beef. And what they mean is we're growing the feed for this beef on land that was already agricultural land when we started growing feed on it. We didn't cut down rainforest to start growing feed. It was agricultural land before. Now, my problem with that is it ignores the fact that beef takes up a lot of land to grow all of this feed. And if we weren't growing feed for beef or for dairy cows or for other ruminants on this land, we could be growing something else. We could be reforesting it. There's also a question of how far back do you look? Like if it was deforested 20 years ago, do you include that in your land use change? What if it was deforested 100 years ago? Most agricultural land was not always agricultural land. At some point, it had other vegetation on it. And in most cases, that other vegetation was a better carbon sink than the current use. So that's why we look at opportunity costs. And increasingly, researchers are looking at our opportunity costs, but you still might find some data that only looks at land use change. So how do we translate this information, these carbon footprints, into information that consumers can use? So first, we calculate the emissions for generic products. And we get this information from peer-reviewed research. All of our sources, we're very transparent about all of our sources, about where information is coming from. And when we have a question about anything, we get in contact with the researchers that were involved. So the data in this chart is from WRI and from Poor and Nemechek. And we've talked to the people who worked on that to make sure that we were understanding and to make sure that we were accurately using their data. And in some cases, they shared with us their larger data sets that didn't necessarily get into the peer-reviewed article. The trick is when we're gathering emissions data from different sources, we need to make sure we're harmonizing that data so that if we're looking at data for apples from one source and salmon from another source, that we're measuring the same thing, that those researchers who did those analyses, they used the same methodology and they looked at the same inputs when they were calculating that. And that has been honestly most of the work that we've put into this. And I mentioned earlier, I have a problem with a lot of the existing carbon labeling schemes and carbon footprint calculators. A lot of them don't do that. And you can see if you try one of the carbon footprint calculators that currently is available online, there are a lot of discrepancies when you look at different products. For example, I found one where the carbon footprint per gram of milk was higher than cheese. And I thought, well, that doesn't make sense because you need a lot more milk to make the cheese. But you'll see that, and the reason for that is just getting different information from different sources without harmonizing. Where we are right now is we currently have a core database of about 100 generic ingredients. And these are things like beef, cheese, chicken, coffee, we have wine. And we're in the process of building out that database so that we can grab most emissions that you would find on the ingredients label of a product that you might find in the supermarket. Eventually, we will partner with sustainable producers to do more specific emissions calculations for specific branded products. And like Luke said, this is one of the ways that we will actually make money. How our business will work is that we will connect these sustainable producers with people using our app who are interested in buying sustainable products by providing that reliable third-party verification. So it's not just greenwashing, it's not just advertising. We will do the life cycle analysis to show that, yes, this product actually does have a lower carbon footprint. It is more environmentally sustainable than alternatives. I think rather than go into more detail, because I want to leave time for questions, I'll turn it back over to Luke to talk about where we are in the process and our beta tester sign up.
Yep, thank you. So like Lydia said, we are actually pretty far into this. We are on track to get our first alpha version for internal testing either by the end of this week or hopefully no later than next week. So we're very excited about that. But that also means that very soon we're going to need to have other people, external users, testing this. And what I've got up on the screen right now is all the different ways you could find us and contact us and look up our cute videos that Leia produced for us. But there's also a contact us form on our webpage, gojelly.fish, or you can contact us on any of our various platforms, give us your information and say, I would like to be a beta tester, so that later this summer, we hope we will have a beta version ready to send out and say, tell us what you think, tell us what we did right, tell us what we did wrong, tell us where things could be better. All of the things, or even tell us when something's broken and not working, all the things that a beta tester should be doing. So this is your personal invitation to connect with us and maybe get a early preview of the product before it launches.
Yeah. And so to conclude, now don't all you bio majors come after me, because there are different ways of calculating, but by some calculations, jellyfish are the most energy efficient creatures on the planet. And that's what we should try to emulate, just be more energy efficient in our lives and with our diets.
So conclusion for me, jellyfish is for everyone. It's everybody's responsibility to do their part to help with climate change. It's not just governments or nonprofits or the industry. If there's one thing I've learned while working on this project, it's that the science is clear. Working with our research team, I've learned so much about the CO2 equivalent of food I eat every day. I remember having this conversation with my sister many years ago. I said, I'll stop eating steak when somebody gives me a good reason better than cows are cute. Jellyfish did that. I have stopped eating steak. I used to go to the grocery store and I used to get so excited when I saw a whole New York strip steak for sale, and my brain would immediately go through that checklist. Do I have enough charcoal for my grill? How many friends can I invite over? What sides can I go with this? Now, one of the things that we really want to emphasize is this is not go vegan. I still love grilling. I have just changed what I grill. I found that a lot of meat substitutes grill really well. Chicken is already better than beef, so you can grill so much chicken. But what else can you grill? Can you grill pizza? What about salmon burgers? I've actually made salmon burgers and they are delicious. Now I think, who can I invite over to share my low carbon barbecue with? And if there's one takeaway I want you all to have, it's we all can make a difference. And once we learn, once we see the change that we can make, pass that on to somebody else. Pass it on to a friend, a family member, anybody. Share these links, share our videos, whatever you can do. Together, we really can make a difference in our lives and put pressure on the industry to change. And I think we can do this faster than the government will make these regulations.
Okay, on that, let's open to questions.
What an incredibly exciting startup you've got going here. There are quite a few questions pouring in, so I'll just launch right into them. Are you taking student interns?
We have a wonderful team of interns right now. We have one social media intern and we have 2 research interns. Send us an email. We can see if it's a good fit. We're not currently advertising for interns, but always open to new interest.
Okay.
I'd like to just add to that as well. Yeah, we're not currently taking more interns. It's because the interns we currently have were supposed to be with us for a semester. They all got addicted, and all but one asked to stay on and continue working with after they didn't need it for their credits. So as spaces open up, we will really be looking again, but just not currently.
Why am I not surprised? Maybe if you contact them by email, you'll get in line for one of those internships when it opens up. The second question comes from a staff member. Will your app scan the little stickers on fruit, or does it really only work well on processed foods in boxes or cans?
I'll take that one. Right now, it is just barcodes. We do have lots of grand plans going forward, especially with AI and item recognition. But because we are a small startup, we're going for the easiest pieces first. So right now, it is just barcodes. Eventually, we do plan to expand that.
Okay.
You can also type in the name. So you can type, BANAN. You type in your banana or
okay, that's helpful. I'm going to sign up to be one of your beta testers for sure.
Nice.
The next question, I think, also comes from a staff member. What will happen to our personal data on Jellyfish? What are we giving up in exchange for this app?
I'll take this one again. Actually, that's a very good question too. One of the things that we do hope to do is gather high-level metadata. We're not going to gather anybody's personal data or anything further than the information we need to get you your rewards. The high-level metadata is mainly so that we can track shopping trends. It's not meant to say, oh, we know that you buy all this, we're going to send you targeted ads. The only targeted ads you're going to get are when you scan a product and it says, here's an alternative to the product you are looking at right now.
I can see why people are concerned. Who was it? Google, who used to have the slogan, do no evil?
Yeah.
Once upon a time.
So we can actually do one better than Google because we are a registered public benefit corporation. So we actually have it in our articles of incorporation that one of our purposes has to be working for the public good.
Okay, I hope that reassures the questioner. The next question is anonymous. This project comes from a place of doing more good, but what about the ethical impacts of suggesting certain products over others? For example, palm oil might be more efficient, but olive oil isn't killing orangutans.
Yeah, my answer to that is olive oil isn't killing orangutans because there's not the same demand for olive oil that there's for palm oil. There is a wonderful, so first read our blog, and second, there's a wonderful IUCN report. Full disclosure, I used to work for IUCN, but they came out with this report a few years ago. I did not work on this report, from an expert group of scientists and conservationists, and they investigate the kind of economics behind what would happen if we shifted from palm oil, and then some of the solutions how we can keep palm oil from killing orangutans.
IUCN, for our listeners who aren't familiar with it, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. I assume it's IUCN.org.
It is IUCN.org.
And maybe you could post the URL of your blog in the chat for people who would like to follow up.
Absolutely. If you just go to our website, so you can see gojelly.fish.
Okay, that sounds good. The next question, what constitutes feed for beef? Is it corn and other monoculture grains, or is it native grasses and other biodiverse vegetation?
Wonderful question. Yeah, so one of the advertisements that I get is grass-fed beef. And here's the question, is grass-fed beef better than corn-fed beef? The answer is there's no evidence that it's significantly better in terms of carbon footprint because you still need a lot of land for that beef cow to graze on. Also, a lot of grass-fed beef, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've never eaten anything other than grass. There's a bit of legal wiggle room on what you can call grass-fed beef. But even if it's 100% pasture raised, you need a big pasture. And that's a lot of land that if you calculate using our method, which is becoming the accepted method of using opportunity costs, you're still losing on all of the other potentially more environmentally beneficial land uses of that land.
Presumably, if a producer decides to switch to grass-fed beef, they have incentive to clear more forest than they would if they were using a large feedlot system.
Yeah, potentially. It depends on the situation, on where they are, on what kind of land is around them. Which
could be a carbon nightmare when you think you're doing something that's actually healthier for you. The next question, we often speak about not eating meat or eating less meat or eating certain kinds of meat. How about eating cheese and dairy?
This is a wonderful question because this is like my personal story. I call it the vegetarian fallacy. I was a vegetarian for probably several decades, probably 20 years. And I ate cheese. I ate a lot of cheese. I probably ate more cheese than before I became a vegetarian because instead of pasta with meatballs, I would have pasta with cheese. And cheese is one of the foods with the highest carbon footprint. So switching, like one of the things that shocked me when I first started doing these calculations was comparing chicken and cheese. And chicken actually has a lower carbon footprint than cheese. So I call this the vegetarian fallacy because for years I believed that a vegetarian diet was across the board better than an omnivore diet. And that's not always the case. It really does depend on what you eat. So absolutely fabulous question. And one of the reasons why it's not just enough to say, oh, are you a vegan? Are you a vegetarian? Are you a meat eater? But you do need to think about these specific distinctions between foods.
Does that chicken versus cheese comparison that you're giving depend on including the opportunity cost, or would it come out that way even if you didn't?
No, it comes out that way even if you don't. And we did I think we did a social media post on this. I'm not sure we did a blog on this, but it's not close either. There's a big difference even without opportunity costs.
That is extraordinary, really extraordinary.
Yeah.
Vegetarians take note. Cheese lovers take note. Chicken lovers, a way to assuage your guilt. The next one says from a faculty member, this may be a silly question, but do people eat jellyfish? That's what I thought this talk was going to be about.
I don't know. I bet they'd be good. Maybe we should start that. We should pivot a side project for jellyfish. Selling jellyfish.
The next says, will we be able to scan barcodes on wines? That comes from a faculty member.
Mm-hmm. Yes, wines and beers. So currently we just have one generic number for wine and one generic number for beer, but we definitely want to work on getting more refined data for different brands of wine and different brands of beer. There are certainly some winemakers and beer makers who have an interest in showing that they're more sustainable than their competitors.
Yeah,
and that might sponsor your app.
Right?
Yep, and this is one of the things I want to comment on too. Because of we're stuck right now, limited to what we can find from other people's research. Right now, alcohol in the US, it does not follow the same regulations that other food products do. They don't need to disclose all of their ingredients. So we are left with, eventually when we have scaled up and we have the resources, going to the individual wine producers and saying, we'd like to do a life cycle analysis on your farm. And we can then tell you, is your wine better or worse than the average? And in that way, we can make better recommendations than saying brand A is better than average or brand B is worse than average.
This to me is one of the most exciting things about your project, that you know, creating a way to channel the industry, the people in the industry who want to advertise their products as sustainable, and to reward them for it. And, you know, to put that information directly into the hands of consumers with the power and, you know, the exponential multiplying force of social media. It's just, that's a huge amount of energy to tame and direct in the direction of sustainability.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it directly addresses this problem of greenwashing that we're seeing more and more. So the number of sustainably marketed products that are marketed as sustainable products has just skyrocketed in the past few years. And it's because producers know that consumers want sustainable products, but there's currently no check on that. There's no legal limit on what you can call sustainable, which means that a consumer who wants to do good, we don't know if we're seeing something that is actually more sustainable than the competitors, or if it's just greenwashing. And so there is a need for some, you know, solid scientific information, solid reliable information to show that, yes, you know, this one is more sustainable. No, this one is just advertising.
Yeah, similarly with how the term organic used to be thrown about. And now at least you know what USDA organic means.
Right, exactly.
So it'll be a jellyfish sticker, I guess, that it gets instead of a sustainable sticker.
But it won't get a sticker. It'll just be through the app. And we will actually draw on a lot of these existing standards. So we talked about palm oil. There's the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, which is developing a number of standards. And they have a list of members. And they actually have scorecards for different companies based on how they produce their palm oil. And we can integrate that information directly into the app. So you don't need to know what all these labels mean. You don't need to check all these labels. You can just, you know, scan, check the app, and we'll integrate the impact of those labels into the calculation.
I think if I can add too, I think one thing that we kind of cut for time is the way we're going to be showing this information is going to be score based. So you, like Lydia just said, you won't need to understand what all the labels mean. You won't need to keep track of which labels are advertising and which ones are real. You're going to scan a product and you're going to see a score from 0 to 100 telling you exactly what that product or how efficient that product is in terms of its CO2 use.
Yeah.
You're
And
going
if
to
you want information, we're going to provide you as much information as you want. I love information. I love data. It's not going to all be on the front page. If you click more information, you'll get, we're going to show our notes.
You're going to have to find some Facebook group that is people who are addicted to airline miles, as you were, and to those rewards, and try to get a posting there to direct their attention to your app. The next question is anonymous. It says, have you considered that people might choose commercial products with barcodes to use the app rather than eventually low carbon fresh foods from local suppliers and farmers markets?
That's a really interesting comment. I think, as Luke said, I mean, eventually we are going to try to get machine learning technology so you can, for example, just take a picture of the food. For now, like we will have the functionality that you can type it in, but I hadn't considered that it might actually affect people's behavior where they choose to shop. But we can. This is why we need beta testers. We need these good ideas.
Yeah, when you send in a picture of the food, you might also want to have a blank to send in. You know, is this at a farmer's market or is this at a local roadside stand or something that indicates, you know, whether it's a small local producer as opposed to a large commercial producer, and get that into your algorithm. The next question is from a staff member. The pet food market seems like a huge consumer of beef, lamb, pork, and other meats. Will the app also scan pet foods?
Oh my gosh, we did on pet food.
we did do that, a whole blog post on that, and I'm not sure. We haven't considered pet foods, but we did do. We had the same question, and I think right now both Lydia and my dogs are eating a plant-based dog food. With the caveat though, don't do this for cats. Cats cannot handle plant-based diets.
Yeah, and do talk to your veterinarian. And my veterinarian actually recommended a plant-based diet because my dog has stomach issues. But yeah, there's no reason we couldn't scan dog foods. They have the information on the label. We should be able to get it. It's just something to add down the road.
Cats, do not try this at home.
Yeah, don't try it.
Another anonymous question. Are you seeking funding as a startup? And I assume they would want to know, if so, from where?
Yeah. So yes, I'll take this. We have been seeking funding. We actually were in discussions with different options, and so right now we're self-funded. And looking at our options so far, we decided that it wasn't worth the stake that the investors wanted in the company for the amount of capital, because we are able to self-fund right now, and we do want to hold on to as much of our company as we can, as long as we can. At some point, we will need to seek outside investors. But for now, we're just a little bit wary about giving away too much control. And part of that is just our environmental mission, that investors want money. They want a return on their investment. And Luke and I and our other two founders, we are driven by a desire to actually help the world. And we're a little bit worried about losing control of that aspect of the company.
And just to add, it's partly about losing control, but there's also, I think what your questioner was alluding to was we don't want to seem like we're being influenced by or owned by our funders. Yeah. We don't want to appear like we've been bought. If the Beef Council came in and said, we'll offer you $2 million if you'll support this product, we would say no.
You don't want to be Instagram bought up by Facebook.
We do not.
And it sounds like Shark Tank is not the right place for you.
No.
Shark Tank deals are not good if you look at them. They take a huge amount of the company and they don't give that much capital.
You need to talk people who are really people with serious money who are interested in investing in sustainability into creating a new show, Jellyfish Tank,
Uh,
that would serve companies like yours trying on this kind of a mission.
Yeah.
Here's the last question, at least that we have so far. Though the other options than chicken in that first poll don't make a big impact on carbon emissions, are there other advantages in the big picture that might make plastic recycling, for example, still an environmentally impactful thing to do? You're not saying recycling, eating local, minimizing food waste aren't still things we should do, right?
I can take this one. Yes, what our recommendations and our polls are based on today, right now, the state of the industry. If there were advances, specifically in plastic, I've read a lot of interesting technologies coming up that could biodegrade plastic into renewable fuel sources. That would absolutely change our answer to this question. But further, this is not the only thing. We are looking at the low-hanging fruit. This is one part of the puzzle. There are so many other things people can and should be doing in addition to looking at their food. We can't tackle everything, but we are going to tackle this one piece.
Well, it's incredibly inspiring work, I have to say. I hope students out there who are saying to yourself, I mean, what can just one person do? Will look at this small handful of people and say to yourself, wow, what one person can do is really amazing if they have a smart idea and if they are clever enough to figure out how to harness market forces in the direction that their idea wants to go. We're just about out of time. I'd like to thank the speakers once again, the Slobodians. This is just really quite fascinating, inspiring, really. I'd like to thank Emily again, our ASL interpreter. I'd like to thank the proposer, Tim Bechtel and Maddie Hilbig. And thank you again to the audience. And I hope you'll join us next week for next week's Common Hour, which I'll remind you again is Professor Stephanie Rivera Berutz, and her talk is In the Face of Modernity, Lettered Women of the Hispanophone Caribbean. Thanks again, everybody, and see you next week.
Thank you.